Okay, here's a question for you. What makes for legitimate worship? Right? When does the worship of the church become genuine? Or to put the question another way, when is God pleased with our worship? Now, one answer to that question that has become increasingly common is to do with our meaning it. All right, and the idea seems to be that if I mean what I say, if I mean what I sing, then my worship is acceptable to God. That's what makes my worship genuine. Now, now we need to be a bit careful here, okay? Because there's obviously truth in that. There does need to be an integrity and an intentionality about what we're saying and doing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And certainly, no one is advocating that we go to church with a view to not meaning what we say or what we sing as part of the service, what we do. But if the question is, what makes our worship genuine? What makes it authentic? If our answer to that question is that I have to mean it, then well, let me say this. At best, it's inadequate. Okay, we'll think about that in a minute. But at worst, it might be actually incredibly dangerous and just wrong. All right. Now let's think about that. Why might this be dangerous? Why might it be wrong to say that the thing that makes my worship genuine is that I really mean it? Well, let's just take that as a statement. Do you really mean it? And how do you know whether you really mean it or not? The human heart, the Bible tells us the human heart is deceitful above all things, that we can't understand it. And that's true of us even after we have become Christians. All right? If you're saying to me, I have to know that I mean what I'm saying and what I'm singing before it counts, well, I don't know if I can make that diagnosis. Best will in the world. And quite apart from that, what about the times when I come to church because it's a duty as well as a joy? I'm not feeling the joy. I'm here because I know it is the right thing to do. This is not necessarily where I want to be. I probably don't mean what I'm saying at the start of the service, but what I'm doing is I am relying on the people of God and whoever's leading the service, and I'm relying on the Spirit of God to be at work in and through them to draw me into a place where my worship is becoming more authentic, more genuine, where it does have a measure of integrity. All right, so I think it's naive. I think it's pastorally naive to say we have to really mean it before our worship is genuine. But more fundamentally than that is the fact that actually that's not about Jesus, All right, in that sort of scenario, what makes my worship good and right and true is me doing it well enough, being good enough at it. And that's really, Christians think like that. It's always a bad sign. It's a really dangerous way to think about Christianity. You see, when I come to worship, even when I'm at the top of my game as a Christian, when I come to worship, there's all kinds of ambiguities in me. I'm overshadowed by the ongoing realities of my sin. There's a selfishness in me that, well, like Solomon, means that I'm all too often the focus of my worship is me, right, rather than him. And I need the Spirit of God to be at work in me, to cultivate in me an integrity that I don't have the capacity for left to my own devices. And I need Christ to be not just the focus of my worship, but I need him to be my mediator, right? I need him to take my worship and to kind of work on it so that it becomes something in him and through him that is acceptable and a delight to the Father. All right, so you see, there can be a really dangerous way to, it can be actually an unchristian way to think that what makes my worship genuine is me and me really meaning it. All right, we need to be thinking much more about what God is doing in our worship than what we are doing in our worship. But even at best, that answer that what makes our worship genuine is me meaning it. Even at best, I want to say that it's inadequate, and it's in a way it's not that helpful. You see, when I have this conversation with people and they talk about us really meaning it, I think what they're saying is that in the moment of worship, all right, as I am part of the service, as I'm singing this song, or as I am saying this piece of liturgy perhaps, or this prayer, um, to really mean it, what does that mean? It means that there's a kind of a passion, an intensity, and an intentionality about it. My heart's in it as I say it, as I sing it. There's a kind of a lining up of my whole being behind what's coming out of my mouth. And again, I need to be fair on this. That's all good as far as it goes, but we also need to be honest and to realize that even when we take into account all the ambiguities of who we are, even in worship, all right, this idea that we need to mean what we say in worship, and that's what makes our worship genuine. That's what makes our worship pleasing to God. Actually, that falls far short of what God requires in his word. All right, let me just be really blunt about this. It is entirely possible, and all of us will have experienced this if we're Christians. It is entirely possible for me to really mean, or at least to believe that I really mean what I'm saying or what I'm singing in a service of worship, and then to walk out of the service and completely forget about it. It's not even like I'm necessarily rejecting it or regretting what I've said or sung or thought. It's more like the mist in the morning that simply evaporates as the sun comes up. We leave church, we leave the service, and we get caught up in the rest of the day, or we start planning for Monday morning, and we simply forget what we've said, what we've sung. We're distracted. We forget what we even thought. We may well have meant it at the time, but it slipped from our minds and our hearts. Solomon says it's like a dream, which can seem so vivid, so meaningful at the time, but actually it has no reality. And that's it's an analogy for what is said by a fool in a service of worship. No matter how vivid, no matter how meaningful it might have felt at the time, Solomon says it just lacks reality. Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. And if that's the case, then the fact that we maybe really did mean it when we said it or sung it, actually that counts for very, very little. What actually matters is, what do you do when the service is over? To use Solomon's words, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and then not fulfill it. All right, it would appear from that a far more searching question is, do we still mean it when the music stops and the service is over? When we step out of the moment with its immediacy, with its emotion, do we still mean what we said? And do we put into practice the commitments we've made, the promises that we have declared? You see, we often think that worship should resonate with what we say and do in the rest of our lives. Actually, the converse is also true, that the rest of our lives must resonate with what we say and do in worship. See, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to say or to sing things in a church service that we then don't act on, don't put into practice in the rest of our lives. Solomon warns us, and these are very strong words. He warns us that God takes no pleasure in fools who make massive promises in worship and then don't fulfill them. In fact, we're told it angers him, and that it's better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. I mean, obviously, the best thing to do is to make the vow and then fulfill it. But if we make a vow and then don't fulfill it, Solomon tells us that our mouths have led us into sin. Even what we sing, even what we say in a service of worship can actually be sinful, and that we may well face judgment for it. They're sobering thoughts. Truly, we should heed Solomon's warning. Guard our steps. See, foolish, insincere involvement in worship turns out that's as meaningless as a life lived without reference to God at all.